Hello and welcome back to Identity Architects, the podcast that's designed to spotlight pioneers in our industry who are changing the way that data is used to drive more engaging data-driven experiences. I'm your host Ben Cicchetti, and for this episode, our Customer Success Director, Amy Tranter, sat down with Margaret Jobling, CMO of NatWest, to discuss trust, data privacy, the value exchange, and much, much more. Before I hand it over to Amy and Margaret, just a reminder to hit that subscribe button so you know when the latest episode of Identity Architects lands. But without any further delay, here's Amy's conversation with Margaret.
Hello, Marg. Nice to meet you.
Lovely to meet you, Amy.
I hope you're keeping well. Thank you for joining us today. So for anyone who doesn't know you, can you give us a quick introduction to yourself and NatWest, who you are and what you do?
So, Margaret Jobling, I'm the CMO for NatWest Group. Been there 2 years and look after basically marketing, insights, and customer experience strategy.
Great, thank you. So we're going to do a few quick fire questions, warm us both up, and then we'll go into the more grittier stuff. So first of all, what is your earliest memory of advertising?
Oh, my earliest memory, I would say, for MASH Get Smash. That would be for MASH Get Smash. Little aliens, remember, back in the day? That would be one of the first ads that I remember.
I'd love you to sing a little bit more for us.
You wouldn't, Amy. You really would. No, you want people to carry on listening? Oh, stop that now.
Lovely. What was your first job in either advertising or marketing?
So my first marketing job was in Unilever because I was a techie by background. So I did a PhD in laser chemistry, believe it or not. And
Wow.
then I moved into Unilever to do R&D. So my first job was as senior brand manager for Dove deodorant for UK and for Europe. So
Right.
yeah, they must have been mad giving me that job, to be fair, when I look back. But because I had no marketing experience, so I got chucked in right at the deep end.
But then look at you now. They obviously knew what was to come. So knowing what you know now, what would you say to yourself when you first started your career?
I would say to myself now, it's a marathon, not a sprint. So you can't sprint a marathon, but just enjoy, learn, don't be in too much of a hurry.
Yeah, great advice. Great advice. I try and tell myself that. Easier said than done sometimes, though, isn't it? It's nice to hear from somebody else. What do you love about what you do right now and the industry that you're in?
So I absolutely love financial services. And I think the reason I love financial services is because we can make a real and practical difference to people's lives. So money really does make the world go round, yet in the UK specifically, it's not talked about. It tends to be a thing of stress for many people. There's actually still really sadly very little financial education for young people. And some of the stats are shocking. I mean, 80% of young people don't feel confident about their financial future. 50% of young people, don't really understand money and how to manage money. So I love the fact that in the role I'm in, we can make not just a financial difference, but a societal difference and have a real impact on people's lives.
Yeah, that's lovely to hear. Gosh, I didn't realize those stats were so high. So yeah, I do understand that making a difference. So within advertising, we're obsessed with the concept of identity and the ability to identify certain individuals across devices and platforms. Talking about the younger generation, how would you explain this term identity to a 10-year-old?
Oh, what a question. For
I know,
me,
we're
I
keeping you on your toes.
for me, identity on digital platforms is the same as fingerprints. So to a young person, I'd be saying, think about your fingerprints in real life. You touch things and it leaves a mark, and you can't see it, but you can be identified by it. And what you do online is exactly the same. You leave a digital fingerprint wherever you go that is unique to you, and you can be tracked and traced, and you can see what you're doing.
Yeah, that sounds brilliant. And to a slightly more intense question, what keeps you awake at night? Assuming this is to do with obviously the industry? It could be a wider thing if you want.
So I would say from a work perspective,
Yeah.
nothing keeps me awake at night, actually, apart from the dogs barking at the foxes in the garden. The thing that really keeps me awake at night, well, not, no, sorry. So from a work perspective, there's nothing keeps me awake at night. What does keep me awake at night literally is foxes and the dogs going mental.
Yeah.
But what I worry about, or what I think is challenging for us in the industry, is where we need to change customer behavior. So, and two things I would really call out that I think are challenging. How do we help customers change behavior around climate and sustainable solutions? Because that's a real challenge today. And we know to hit our business goals, it has to be a partnership. It's a partnership with customers, it's a partnership with industry, it's a partnership with government and regulators. And I think that's a real challenge, particularly against a backdrop of cost of living, where unless you can position solutions around good for the planet, good for the pocket, I think we're going to really struggle because some of the solutions are expensive or more expensive. So I think behaviour change around sustainability, there is a big gap between what we say and what we do. So there's a willingness and intent there, but it's not flowing through to action. And the other area where I think is a real conundrum for us is frauds and scams. So we are the fraud capital of the world, literally in the UK,
Okay.
which is driven by we're digitally savvy nation and we're relatively affluent nation when you look at us in the context of the world. So therefore we're a real target for frauds and scammers. We're seeing it going up. So one of our big challenges is how do we work with our customers to help keep them safe and keep their money safe? Because, you know, they're really smart people out there who are spending a lot of time thinking about how to extract cash from people illegally. And some of the stuff we do ourselves doesn't help that. You know, passwords, giving stuff away in terms of key information. So both require, I think, behavioural shift from customer, which is hard to really insight and do. So for me, it's the big, you know, what are the big questions of how marketing can step in and help shift behaviour? I mean, on the fraud stuff, 90% of customers never think it's going to happen to them. Yet when it does, it's absolutely catastrophic, both from a financial perspective, but from an emotional, you know, it makes me feel stupid. How did it happen to me? It's traumatic. And yet, when I look at some of the steps that people are taking, they're not protecting themselves well enough. So that for me, it's the big challenges, I think, around how do we help customers do something to help themselves in a way that both is educational and useful and not patronising. And they are, I think, behaviour change challenges.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think it's that tough scenario where you need to raise awareness of something potentially quite scary before you actually change that behavior. So that's, I guess, quite a difficult position to be in what comes first. You almost want to raise awareness that something bad doesn't happen to someone. Yeah, and I think your other point around sustainability, we see that come up quite a lot on this podcast. So I think everybody's being quite mindful of it. But as you say, it's what are those steps that we need to take? So yeah, thank you for sharing those. Quite a few things keeping you up. Thank you for sharing. Um, what gets you motivated in the morning? Let's switch this round.
I and I think I've said it, I love work for the financial services industry, specifically love working for NatWest groups. And the reason I get such a joy out of it is we are very purpose driven as an organization. So what gets me out of bed in the morning is I'm working for a financial service provider that really does care. I'm working with a set of people with a similar value set who want to change the world. And we've got to figure out how we do that, and I can have a direct impact on people, people's money, and, you know, society. So what gets me out of bed is the opportunity to do that with people that I really, really enjoy working with, and you can see outcomes. Like, I talk a lot about outcome, not busyness. You know, I think quite often people mistake busyness for effectiveness, and it's not the same thing. So I can see we are tangibly making a difference, whether it's through the work we're doing with NatWest Thrive or the work we're doing on climate. I mean, we've just published our STBI targets. We want the first that are out there with the plan and transition plans. And, you know, that's big, impactful stuff. But fundamentally, it's with a group of people that I just love working with. You know, there's no agendas, there's no egos. It's a culture where we genuinely do care for each other. And, our purpose is all about how do we help our customers and businesses and our people thrive. And my job is to unblock the blocks that gets in the way of that. So, yeah, I just love what I do because I can see it adds value to the world at large. And people need reasons to jump out of bed for work. That isn't just, I've increased the share price by 1%, because that's not enough. That's not why I don't work. And don't tell my boss, but I don't work for the money doesn't motivate me. It's actually doing a good job and making a difference is what gets me excited. And I work for an organization where I really can do that.
For the listeners that can't obviously see us having this conversation, you are literally grinning ear to ear. So it's the most excited I've seen you talking about it all. So I can truly see that motivation. And I think I agree. I think people first and then, results follow as well. So I can completely empathize and relate with that. Right, last rapid fire question for you. If there was a song that was a soundtrack to your life, what would it be? Feel free to tell me or sing it.
If I sing it, you'd never recognise it. I have a terrible singing voice, even though I think I can sing. I would say Don't Stop Believing Journey. I am an absolute eternal optimist, and that is my karaoke go-to. So more shouty-okie, I would say, to be fair. But
Okay.
yeah, I believe that, don't stop believing, you can do it. And I think the thing that holds us back is self-limiting beliefs. And actually, the more you could be out there. I've always go, what have you got to lose? The worst anyone could ever say is no. And then they need a good reason to stop you from doing stuff. So yeah, push on, do what you believe in. So don't stop believing.
That's great. Karaoke song, that might be podcast number 2, perhaps in the future coming our way. Okay, thank you. So now we're going to go a bit more gritty on some of the questions here. So everyone's talking about first party data, the cookieless future and privacy. What are your thoughts around the status quo in the industry right now? So outside of financial services. And how is NatWest preparing for the future? Quite a big question there.
Wow. How'd you go from don't stop believing to
I
let's talk
know. Well, you've
this
built
future?
us all up now with that song. We can't wait to hear the next part. You can sing this.
So what do I think? I would say, cookieless is not new. It's been around actually for a number of years on the agenda, but what we are seeing is a rapid shift, and it's definitely gaining momentum. If you look at the reality, probably 50% now is on the internet is cookieless. And actually, we've been trying to figure and solve for many years around what do we need to do and how do we do it. And it starts, I would say, if you think our job is to serve our customers and make sure we serve them and build relationships in the right way, this is all in service of helping and protecting customers and not over serving advertising and make sure we manage that relationship. The biggest thing companies can do is to sort out the first party data. That ultimately is going to be the route through to your ability to talk to customers, and therefore getting your first party data in good quality, making sure you've got hard opt-in and permissions to be able to talk to your customers is the most critical thing we can do, and work with the tech platforms. So, because as they're making changes and thinking about what they're doing, how do you work in partnership with those platforms? Because ultimately, you need to be ahead of the curve and thinking about it. But the single most important thing you need to do as an advertiser, service provider, is to get your house in order. Because if you get your house in order and you've got the right value exchange with customers and they want you to talk to them, then actually you can have direct access, and then you work through how do you append and all the rest. But the start point is get your house in order on your data.
Yeah, that's a really clear message. And I love the reference to partnership. You kept mentioning about partnership in that it is something so important, and it's not about being market leading or competitive. It's just partnering with consumers and businesses and partnering with tech platforms. And I love the reference of that. I think we are such a fast competitive world. It's lovely to just hear you say that partnership is kind of key. You don't have to do it alone. People are doing and figuring this out together.
Totally. And some of the stats, my other day job, I'm ISPA president, and obviously looking at one of the biggest challenges in our industry is trust. But what undermines trust? If I give you if I give you my data, are you using it in a responsible way? How are you building and serving content that's relevant for me? How are you building engagement that feels like it isn't you selling me something all the time?
Yeah.
And I've got a Michael Kors handbag that follows me around the internet because we're over serving ads, and actually transparency in the industry is one of the things that we really need to fix. I mean, 85% of customers would say from the Credo stuff that was done back in with the EA in 2020, advertising is everywhere in a bad way. I'm being bombarded. And actually, if I look at what the regulator's trying to do, he's trying to protect the customer. If you look at what brands are trying to do, they're trying to do the right thing for their customers and serve up the right content at the right time that is relevant. And ideally, what platforms want to do is serve the right content to their customers so they keep coming back. And therefore, the collective, we've all got the same ambition. How do we work together to solve what's right for the customer? Because ultimately, that is the person where it all comes together. And the reasons we exist as brand is to help our customers thrive. And the reasons those tech platforms exist are advertiser funded to help their customers thrive. So, and the unlocker of all of that is data. And I think it's a real differentiator for brands if they manage it well and treat it as what I think is a differentiating capability
Yeah.
rather than, and the thing that scares me most, honestly, Emma, is customers give it away too freely. I mean, if you look at, and there's some scary, especially if I look at young people, I don't think they realize just how precious and how much, I mean, we talked about, what is identity, how much their identity and their fingerprints are being left absolutely everywhere. And that's why, if you look at frauds and scams, that's why frauds and scammers are having an absolute field day because they can get access to people. They can look like they know you. They can serve up content that looks like it's either coming from a branded player or, is relevant. And I don't know if you've seen, I watched, and it is scary. I sent them to my daughters, but some of the YouTube, where a young girl sat on park bench, man comes up to her and says, "Hi, Amy, lovely to see you again." And the girl's going, "I just don't know you. I know I met you at the party last week, and you were in such and such a place, and I remember you, and you talked to you." And within 5 minutes, that young girl's saying, "Oh yeah, I do remember you now." All of it was from looking at the footprint that she'd left, things she posted on Facebook, where like Snap, you look at you can see exactly where they are, what they're doing. It's frightening. So for me, the value of data, and particularly in the job that we do, I'm in a bank, we are uber cautious about how do we use and protect and have right guardrails around data and data quality because it's frightening what can be achieved. And I would say, part of our job is to help customers understand why it's so important, why you need to think about who you're saying yes to and when you're turning stuff off and when you turn on. Getting customers to engage with that agenda is really hard, really hard. Getting them to go in and check their permissions and make changes, they're just not interested. And ironically, I think they've been so bombarded that do you click yes to accept cookies when you go into a site? Whatever, yeah, I'll just click that, and not actually thinking about and understanding what's the consequence of you just clicking that button.
It's really interesting on the exchange. I mean, we talk a lot about value exchange. So how can you exchange value so both parties benefit and protect? I think we're only just moving into figuring out the answer to that as an industry. My next question you've almost answered, but I'm just keen to dig a little bit more, was obviously with consumers becoming more careful with their data and the risk of it being exposed. So back to that fingerprint example you used, especially in that banking and servicing financial
Industry.
Let's go back. Especially when it comes to banking and the financial sector. How are you educating your customers about their data privacy and rights?
We are doing a huge amount of work, which interests me, starts with the customer. We've done a lot on what do customers currently understand, What do customers expect in terms of value exchange? What's important to them? So what we've seen is, interestingly, in banking, there's an implicit level of trust. So a high percentage of customers, over 80% of customers, said, I would give you my data. And I'm prepared to, because I think there's an implicit exchange around services. So we can serve up better interest rates, give you products that really help you save money, educate around frauds and scams. So we're doing a lot of work to go, how do you simplify the language? Where do you serve up the choices? How do we get people to then select and think about channels of choice? But the start point, actually interesting for financial services, has been there is an implicit level of trust and an expectation that there is a value exchange in me doing this. I think the key thing we then need to do is make sure you don't abuse or use that in the wrong way. So, what's a service message and where does service start and stop? What's a marketing message and where does marketing start and stop? And then there is an area of grey, us educating around frauds and scams, for example, isn't a sale and it's not a direct service message. I'd argue actually is part of the service we offer because we're helping protect you. So we are doing a lot of how do we express this in really simple way. I mean, customer doesn't know what a cookie is. I mean, that, they don't know. And when you talk about we're going to do such and such analytics, they don't understand that. So how do we make it really simple? And how do we build it into all of our journeys, all of our experiences so the customer has choice? Because what you get constantly is help me understand what I'm signing up for. The more you deconstruct those options, interestingly, the more trust you build. So the more you could go, do you want us to contact you at these channels deconstructed, the more confidence I've got. And explain simply, and what are you going to do with my data? And that helps customers have, again, trust, because I'm clear about where I can make choices. I'm really clear about what the consequences of those choices are. And that together actually empowers, and that's what we're talking a lot about. How do you put the control in the customer's hands to make the decision around what they want and don't want to hear from their service providers? So we've done a lot of work in that space, and ultimately then plan it into, and how do you make sure your back end, your systems, your data flows, your permissioning hub, you have all of the infrastructure to be able to manage that effectively really well, and future and dynamically manage that, because there's no point setting it all up and then you haven't got BAU run to make sure that's maintained. And the reason a lot of big legacy businesses have got challenges is the back end data flows. I mean, you think of the history of some of the legacy businesses, and I've seen that in the last few businesses I've worked in. They're almost a series of vertical P&Ls that have had technical solutions for that product solution. Therefore, the customer doesn't care that you've got 5 different back-end systems managing 5 different products. The customer expects you to know them, ask them for their information once, regardless of where you show up in the infrastructure. And that is a big challenge for big, complex businesses that have grown through either company acquisition or product expansion, or where their structural architecture at the back end doesn't facilitate a single customer view. And I've said, in energy, the whole energy infrastructure is organized around the meter on the wall, the gas meter, the electricity meter, because that was the one thing that never moved house. The meter doesn't move, the customer moves. So you've got to do a lot of work to go, how do I get an aggregate view? Because the industry isn't organized, and the industry flows aren't organized around people. They're organized, sadly, around meters. So, I think we need to, ultimately, for me, just all come back to the customer. I mean, how do you help customer understand what they sign up for? How do you help them understand the value exchange? How do you make the value exchange what they are interested in? And then how do you make damn sure that you are making absolutely good, sound decisions on what the customer wants you to do and not do, and use that data in a very, very responsible way?
What a lot to be juggling. Yeah, and I love the analogy of the smart meter stays on the wall, and you have to completely understand the customer and how to stay close to them. The industry is all about the consumers, but tech just plays such that fundamental part. What opportunities do you see within data transformation within and for organizations? So we've spoken a lot about customers? What are the current challenges with that as well?
So, I mean, data, as I said, for me is a key differentiating capability in business, and it's multifaceted and comes in multiple forms. I think one of the biggest challenges within businesses is how do you ironically harness the power of that data? So, and I've said this many times, in consumer goods, I spent most of my career in FMCG. The challenge in FMCG is you don't own the customer relationship. Actually, it's the retailer that owns the customer. So you're selling into a retailer, they're selling on. You don't actually know the end point. There's lots of stuff you can do with data and to bit, but you don't own the end to end. In service industries, I know where you live. I know your product holdings. I can predict based on what behaviors I'm seeing on your spend patterns. You're saving up a deposit. I can predict to 95% accuracy now you're likely to take out a mortgage in the next 12 months because you're at this life stage with this spending stroke saving profile. And the biggest challenge is how do you take all of that data and turn it into actionable, usable insights? And that comes with challenges at multiple levels. First of all, people. There is a massive lack of talent in the industry, and it's highly, highly, highly competitive for those people. So today, if you've got digital data analytics in your job title, you can command a pretty high salary, and if you're really good, you're in high, high demand. So the talent attraction and retention in spaces that really are core capability requirements is becoming even higher because everybody's chasing it. Everybody, whether it's the tech companies, whether it's service providers, even, public services, if you look at the government. So talent is a massive challenge. Then infrastructure, and how do you get your data flows, your data governance, your data quality, and the lineage of understanding where your stuff is flowing, because that is a critical enabler of us to be able to use the data. And the third piece is process. How do you take that data and drive it into your business as it runs, whether that's proposition development, because actually the insight and the data and the behavioral stuff we can get hold of says build products and services for people who look like this. And you can be very, very, very directive now and data driven in what that looks like, through to how do you serve up the right message to the right customer in the right challenge, and then measure the impact of that as marketeers. So are we moving the peanut forward? So, I would say if you'd said to me, what's the biggest shift you've seen in your marketing career? For me, it's about the role of marketing and the role of data and technology is so core to now the function versus many years ago when it was about advertising. It's still about great creative and content, but the proliferation of external sites, digital marketing, the infrastructure, the technology as an enabler, it's transformed the role of what we do day to day. And you need to be absolutely, and I've said it and I've joked, but my best friend, and not literally, but the person I need to spend the most time with in the organization is the CTO. Because, how do we get the technology, how do we get the MarTech aligned and the strategy of technology aligned to how we're going to go and communicate and talk to customers, because it's driving customer experience, it's driving our ability to acquire, it's driving our ability to measure, did we make a difference on all of those millions of pounds we've just spent? So, and it's challenging because particularly in businesses that have had 200 years of heritage and infrastructure that you're essentially trying to unpick, because the world has moved on and technology's moved on. I've said we need to move at the speed of life now because the world is shifting so quickly. And you look at all the conversations at the moment around AI and chat, and that's shifting. And as a marketeer, I have to be able to tap into that. And quite often you don't know how. You're looking at it, what, but you've got to be in it to win it. So it's complex, but exciting. That's what I love about the function, to be honest. It moves quick and you've got to keep your finger on the pulse. And and it's hard. You get old and you get programmed into, and actually having people around you who are brilliant at what they do and can upskill me is really important.
It's really interesting to talk about moving from advertising to marketing. So almost being about the message, actually moving about consumer first, people first, and how you link that. That's a lovely concept. And I guess something that companies need to be aware of, because it depends what you are prioritizing and putting first.
And it's, I mean, and I would say it's very easy to say, Amy. It's very hard to do because, if you think of the touch points that you've now got to be worrying about as a marketeer. And I've always said, it's a system. It doesn't work unless it all works. You could have the best communication externally in the world, but if as soon as you hit your channels, it falls apart, we don't convert, we don't call you back if you call us, you go into the branch and you think they should know you and they can't see you on the system. Ultimately, it's technology and data enables all of that to flow. And therefore, the more you can plug into that as a marketeer, the more you can serve and get it right for customers and actually find customers who look like the ones you've got in the external world and pull through. And that all needs to join up. And, it's challenging because you don't own all of those levers, as you've got to understand. And what I've seen in the world is quite often people are very siloed. I do acquisition, which means once it's hit the website, it's somebody else's problem. But actually, you need to care around what's that journey? Where's the dropout? Does it convert? Because it's the old leads versus sales. Unless you're thinking about that end to end, have you got the right tagging on the site? Is the team optimizing the page, worrying about conversion? And have you got aligned objectives? System doesn't work unless it all works. And data enables all of the above. I mean, and that's why for me that's what a source of competitive advantage, but so interesting to work in a service industry because you can make all of that work to your advantage if you can get the system working, which, again, is easy to say, but it's actually really hard to do.
And again, that's that value exchange. So if you've got that part right, that's, I guess, the value that your customers get as well. So in theory, it's very complicated, but it should all work out objectively on all sides. Yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, gosh, you sound busy. So trust is a big part of every business, or so it should be, we say. Um, what are some of the things you think need to change, and how can the industry come together to redefine our relationship with each other? So you've spoken about this a lot from your point of view and where you work. As an industry, how do you think we can work together more?
I mean, and I said my other day job is ISBA presidency, and I see there is a willingness as an industry to work together, particularly on some of the big challenges, and that is a combination of learning from each other. Actually, I see, and I'm a real magpie, to be honest. I mean, I love going to look at other businesses and not do the horse and pony show. Tell me what you've really struggled with, because we are all trying to figure it out, and we're at different stages of maturity and different stages of capability, and sat on different back end tech platforms. So we share the problems as an industry that we're all trying to solve. And again, it starts for me to go, it's all done in service of making things better for customers. So how do we partner with the tech platforms? If you look at something like Origin, which we're driving hard at ISBA, how do we get consistent measurement across the industry that allows you to make choices around how you're spending your money, allows you to optimize your campaigns in a dynamic way, allows you to stop over serving customers and bombarding them with communication. How do we as an industry drive hard for transparency? Where's my money going? How is it allocated? What's happening with the publishers? How then do we match impact with spend? That they're industry problems. How do we work with government to make sure where we have policy and or regulation, it's fit for purpose and there's not unintended consequences? And that's, we speak as one voice as an industry, because the tendency increasingly is to put in regulation. The answer is self-regulation. We should all be behaving and signing up to what does good look like and policing ourselves. But the more you force in regulation, there's a whole heap of side effects of what that then drives. So I think there's massive opportunity, which starts from policy setting, collaborating, and ultimately learning and listening to each other. But it's all in service of, we have to protect the customer, and we have to make sure the customer's getting the right value, deal, outcome that's right for them. And the other lens I put on it is vulnerability. We have a responsibility, and the one of the biggest challenges in the UK is the distribution of wealth, and and how that then shows up. That we have to protect the vulnerable and be responsible in that space, as well as thinking about how you drive value creation. So I think we can all learn from each other, to be honest. And again, interesting, data sits right at the heart of all of that, because customers will give you their data if you think you're going to use it in their best interests, and businesses can then act on that. And how do you share and use it responsibly? But our ability to identify the customer starts from their willingness to want to be identified, and they're only going to want to be identified if they trust what we're trying to do and why we're trying to do it. And I've said before, trust is hard earned, very quickly destroyed.
Yeah.
And therefore, we need to work very hard to make sure that we are doing the right thing and operating in the right way with the right governance around it. Because you lose it, it's very, very hard to rebuild. And it's about what we do, not just what we say. And we have to actually be living the dream of the rhetoric.
I'm interested to hear more about, you mentioned vulnerable quite a few times. What do you mean by vulnerable? You said vulnerable I think it was vulnerable customers.
Vulnerable takes on many guises. If you look at there's a lot of work going on now with the FCA around what do we define as vulnerable, and it's multifaceted. So from physical disability through to mental disability, through to educational, and some of it's transient. So it could be a moment in time. You've had something quite traumatic happen to you in life, a death, a loss of job. So, it's a really complex area, Amy. And I think as a business, helping, which is back to, if you understand your customer and how to help and lean into them at the moment they need it, then we've just got to get better at understanding what does that look like. And so we're doing a lot of work on vulnerability, and how do financial vulnerability is one where we see specifically with cost of living, one of our big fears is people, because of the impact of inflation, interest rate, rising energy prices, rising cost of goods. You could be a working family with two people working, and suddenly you're really struggling to pay the bills. And that's vulnerability, because and a lot of people find themselves in that situation and they've never been in that in their entire life. So how do we be helpful, useful, practical? And again, I think it starts with, do we understand our customers and when they need us, and how do we be seen as a place that you're going to come and ask for help? Because if we don't show up in the right way, right tone of voice, and seen as accessible and part of the solution, then we're not great as a service provider. So for me, vulnerability is very complex, but it is you're, for whatever reason, physical, mental, or situational, you need extra help, and that extra help is totally dependent on what the vulnerability is we need to solve for.
Yeah, no, thank you. That makes a lot more sense. And yeah, and I think it sounds purposeful when you identify all these areas as well. So just following on from that a little bit more, what do consumers need to do to be best equipped for companies collecting their data? So what tools could the industry offer them? So that importance of understanding our customer, what can we do as an industry to offer them more tools for this?
There's definitely an educational piece. Like, how do we, in a very simple way, help customers understand what's being collected, why it's being collected, and there's a language that goes, a pixel versus a cookie versus, that people don't understand it. So I think there's a educational piece. I actually do think there's an opportunity for us to be more consistent as an industry in how we are serving up the options and choices. If you look at the moment, everyone's pretty much doing it in their own way. Is it aggregated? Is it disaggregated? Channel specific? I think the more we can standardize, what does that look like? Because it's like everything. If you ask the same thing in the same way in the same time, you go, and you're well educated around it. Transparency is obviously critical within all of that. How do you help customers understand what you are actually doing with their data? And back to the first point, in a way that's easy to understand, digestible, and I think then there needs to be, and there is, consequence for what I still think is a relatively small percentage of bad actors. If you're not responsible in what you do, there needs to be consequence for that. But I think the more we can come together and self-police and self-regulate and be consistent, I think it will help people understand and simplify the jargon and the language and I like your question of how would you describe it to a 10-year-old, because that's ultimate. And the average reading age in the UK, I think, is 9. When you look at it's 9, and I think the Times writes to a 12-year-old reading age. But we're very assumptive around people's level of understanding on stuff, and they never think about it, and no one's ever really explained it properly. And T's and C's and privacy notices are really not the answer. There might be the regulatory get out of jail card, but customers, the average customer is not wading through the privacy notice. So making it in the journeys and experiences as clear, as simple, and as explicit as possible, I think is really important. And we know it's important to customers because they want to understand the value exchange and understand what you're doing with their data.
I'm smiling as you say this because I'm thinking of the daily acronym that I have to learn when you're in a conversation and somebody puts another acronym in, assuming you know, and think that it means the same thing. So I love that concept of us almost trying to standardize such a important and valuable area. Less acronyms, more consistencies, perhaps.
Yeah, you want to come to banking. I mean, that was my biggest shock, I think. There's even acronyms that have multiple meanings depending on who you're talking to in the bank. How do you navigate that? And it is interesting. I think, particularly if you've been in an industry for a long time, I think you become conditioned to you think this is normal. This is how normal people speak. So it's only when you step into it, you go. And I remember in energy when they were saying, we sell tariffs, and I was like, I don't think I've ever used that word in my life until I start working in an energy. Like, as a customer, what did I call it? Like, I didn't call it a tariff. That's a really weird. But everything's around the tariff, which is bizarre. You do become, it's like the Moonies. I think you become conditioned to this is just the way we talk and do things around.
Yeah. I've definitely been there and had to re-explain a few terms in my time when somebody looks absolutely lost. So what do you want to say that you haven't already, we haven't discussed or mentioned already? Anything you want to add?
No, I think we've been pretty wide ranging. The thing I feel passionate about is, and I say it all the time internally, is the reason we exist and the person that buys our beer on a Friday night is our customers. And therefore, we have to engineer ourselves and organize ourselves to deliver what our customers need from us at the right time and be part of the solution for their worlds. And as brands, unless we do that, we're going to be extinct. And therefore, our job is to make sure we really understand the people we serve and we're doing the right thing for them. And for me, data is such a critical and technology enabler to enact that. So it's a very important conversation because we're in a very privileged place that we have the ability to make an impact. We need to use that carefully and responsibly.
Yeah, I love that. It's almost customer first through all the complexity, and then just to re-say where you said that tech is then the enabler. It can be
Totally
complementary part.
allows us to do better things and serve up better options for the people who ultimately are the reason we exist in marketing to do the jobs that we do.
Yeah, that's lovely. I completely agree. So this podcast is all about individuals who have pioneered new ways to use data to deliver better customer experiences. So when you look to people that you admire in the industry, who would you nominate for us to interview in an upcoming episode?
So there's one person we did work with around permissions. So he's a guy called Bob Hedges, who is a very senior, whether you could get him, he's very senior in Visa. And he's been a brilliant sounding board for us, talking about how to think about customer permissioning, data, responsible value exchange. So I would definitely recommend Bob. He's got some really great insights and understanding and thinking around how brands and businesses need to be thinking about data. So if you could get him, I'm happy to drop him an email and say, here's a gift for you that you might want to take up. But he'd be a really interesting guy to talk to.
Oh, I love a challenge. Let's see how we get on. Mark, thank you so much for today. This has been brilliant. I can really see and feel your energy and passion around all of this. It's been so nice to hear how you guys are working, how you're going about it. I've got quite a few ideas of what I'm going to try tomorrow and the next day as well. But thank you so much for taking the time. It's been fabulous to get to know you and more of what you're up to.
Absolute pleasure. Lovely to meet you, Amy.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks again to Margaret for joining us on Identity Architects. I really enjoyed that conversation, and in particular, I loved Margaret's passion for NatWest being a purpose-driven organisation. As marketers, if we can identify the purpose or that why, it makes our job so much easier, as you always have that North Star to tap into. All that leaves for me to do is to remind you to hit that subscribe button so you know when the next episode of Identity Architects lands. But until then, thanks for listening.